Dortmund were surprised by the move, by the way. They were taken aback. They're not particularly happy that it's happened with only just over a week to go of the transfer window. But Liverpool's official position and Robertson's as of today is that the move is now no longer expected to happen. Liverpool haven't yet had their head turned by the availability of Xabi Alonso since leaving Real Madrid. They had him as one of the leading candidates before Slot was appointed, and it probably is fair to say if Arne Slot goes at any point, then Xabi Alonso, should he be a free agent, will be one of the leading candidates.
Welcome to The Window on talkSPORT, brought to you by Intuit Quickbooks. Save time and unlock growth with integrated business tools and AI automation all in one place. My name is Susan Owens, and this is the show where we deep dive into all of the news, business, and total gossip from the transfer window. Joining me to go over all of the latest from the weekend as we head into these final days is talkSPORT's transfer expert, Ben Jacobs. Ben, we'll start with the reports that Liverpool have contacted ex-Real Madrid boss Xabi Alonso to inquire about his availability. We thought this could happen, but have you actually heard anything about this?
No, I mean, at the moment, Liverpool retain a backing for Arne Slot. It was, again, a disappointing loss at the weekend to Bournemouth. But I think Liverpool's plan is to review things at the end of the season. That won't even necessarily be a review specific to Arne Slot's future. But, of course, the evaluation of the manager is likely to come up. And it would still be a big surprise if Liverpool made any kind of mid-season change. Results would have to decline considerably. Liverpool are still in contention to qualify for the knockout stage of the Champions League. They're in the mix for Champions League qualification. The downside of their season is, of course, that they're not really challenging for the Premier League title. But generally speaking, Liverpool haven't yet had their head turned by the availability of Xabi Alonso since leaving Real Madrid. They had him as one of the leading candidates before Slot was appointed. And it probably is fair to say if Arne Slot goes at any point, then Xabi Alonso, should he be a free agent, will be one of the leading candidates, if not the leading candidate. But Liverpool are not thinking about replacing Arne Slot yet. They want to back him. And Xabi Alonso is not going to hang around, by the way, either. He's looking to get back into work as soon as possible. So it's not a guarantee, even though people are connecting the dots, that Xabi Alonso will end up at Liverpool. I'm not aware of any formal contact yet between Liverpool and Xabi Alonso. And they don't need it either, because if there was ever a vacancy, they know Xabi Alonso well. But for now, Slot retains the backing. But of course, he's got to turn around the form, because Liverpool are having a very inconsistent season. And it looks like they're having a quiet January window as well. My understanding is that Xabi Alonso would like to manage in the Premier League, and I'm sure if you ask Xabi Alonso, he would say absolutely. He'd love to come to Liverpool, his former club, when there originally was the vacancy after Jurgen Klopp left. Xabi Alonso and a few other candidates, such as Ruben Amorim and even Ange Postecoglou, scored very high in Liverpool's data-led shortlisting, but Slot became the unanimous choice. And at the same time as that was playing out, Liverpool kind of had to back off Alonso anyway, because they realised that he was going to wait and go to Real Madrid. And that's exactly what happened. But now, having left Real Madrid, there's only a handful of clubs that Xabi Alonso would, in his dream world, consider. One is Liverpool and the other is Bayern, and we'll have to wait and see if he gets either of those vacancies. But Xabi Alonso would like to go to the Premier League. I'm sure that he'd love a Liverpool role if there ever became a vacancy, but there will be other clubs looking at Alonso, especially now he's a free agent. Tottenham, for example, have got some appreciation for him. If Thomas Frank goes, Maurizio Pochettino may be a candidate there. Roberto De Zerbi was also approached by Tottenham just before they hired Thomas Frank, but he wasn't interested in that role at that time. So it's going to be really fascinating, because we're going to have a huge managerial merry-go-round of movement in the summer. Alonso's a free agent. Maresca is a free agent. Ruben Amorim, let's not forget, is a free agent. Manchester United are going to appoint a manager in the summer. The likes of Iriola and Glasner and Silva could all leave, and in the case of Glasner, will. So clubs looking for a manager will not be short of choices, but at the moment I'm not aware of any formal approach or even contact yet between Liverpool and Xabi Alonso.
And while we're on Liverpool, Andy Robertson's move to Tottenham Hotspur is stalled. What's going on here?
Yeah, I think stalled is a good word. So Andy Robertson was open to Tottenham, and Spurs and Liverpool had an agreement in principle in place for somewhere in the region of £5 million, including add-ons. But this was a very unique and positive, in some ways, negotiation for Liverpool, because there's deep respect between Andy Robertson and Liverpool, and any mid-season exit has to be right for Robertson and Liverpool. So plan A originally was to bring Kostas Tsimikas back on loan from Roma, Andy Robertson to leave Spurs, where it was thought he might join anyway during the summer, and Robertson to feature in the game this week against Qarabağ and get a kind of Anfield farewell. The catch is that Tsimikas' Roma loan does not have a recall clause, and Roma this late in the window, even though they were prepared to sanction it, would need to find a replacement. So all of that, coupled with the fact that Robertson doesn't want to leave Liverpool in the lurch. He doesn't mind if he ends up going somewhere in the summer, because we don't have any indication yet that he's going to be offered a new Liverpool deal. So the timing was very much controlled respectfully by Liverpool and Robertson, as opposed to a usual transfer where a club like Spurs maybe could have pushed a bit more aggressively to get it over the line. And after deep consideration, now anyway, Liverpool have decided not to proceed, even though the nuts and bolts of a deal are there. And we'll have to wait and see whether that holds until the window shuts on February the 2nd, or maybe Roma get in a replacement and it unlocks the door and then this deal happens. So I feel like for now, stalled is the right word. A move to Spurs as of today looking unlikely, but if the market changes in the final days or hours, you never know. It could be resurrected, but Liverpool's official position and Robertson's as of today is that the move is now no longer expected to happen.
So I guess on the topic of things not happening, Eddie Howe has confirmed that Newcastle will not invest in the January transfer window following their 2-0 loss to Aston Villa. Howe said he will look to get the best out of his current squad rather than searching for reinforcements, while also being limited by PSR. Obviously, they invested quite heavily in the summer after Isak's departure, but do you think Newcastle are kind of suffering at the hands of PSR?
Yeah, we know Newcastle's PSR position is relatively tight, compared at least to other big six clubs, but it's also not as bad as in that summer where they nearly sold Anthony Gordon to Liverpool and they were forced to sell Elliot Anderson to Nottingham Forest and Yakubu Minter to Brighton. So there is the ability for Newcastle to bring in a defensive reinforcement in particular, if we're only talking about finances, but the right target has to become available. And at the moment, Newcastle haven't found the kind of profile they're looking for, and it's difficult because they need defensive cover, but when the defenders come back, they've got a fair few options. So you've either got to find somebody that wants to play now and then maybe is a bit older and is happy to take a back seat, or you've got to buy young. And a lot of the young talents that Newcastle like in defence, whether left back, right back, or more versatile that can also play at centre back, they're not available right now. One option on the right hand side still, if they choose to proceed, is Genoa's Brooke Norton-Cuffy, and Newcastle United, Everton and West Ham are three clubs that have looked at the former Arsenal and Chelsea academy product, and he would be a player that could come in for about 20 million euros and offer cover for the injured Tino Livramento. So those kind of deals are there, but you maybe have to pay a little bit more now in the latter part of the window, and because it's mid-season, and that's maybe where Newcastle are reluctant because of their finances. They've still, I'm told as well, but there won't be much longer to activate it, got the opportunity to bring Matt Targett back. So the delay in doing that seems to be proof that Newcastle are seeing if there's any late and opportunistic signings, despite what Eddie Howe said. And then a standard recall clause tends to be taken off the table when you get towards the last week of a transfer window, because the club that has that player doesn't want the recall clause to go to the final seconds of the window. Otherwise, they can be left with nothing and no ability to replace. But Newcastle went to Middlesbrough and they extended the recall clause on Matt Targett by about a week. And my understanding is it will expire at some point this week. So it'll be interesting to see whether, having at the moment not found a young, new permanent signing in defence, actually what Newcastle do is they bring Matt Targett back from Middlesbrough, and that could be one to watch this week.
And those signings from the summer, so Ramsey and Alanga and Voltemade, do you think they're enough to get Newcastle to the end of the season successfully? Or do you kind of think this is Eddie Howe saying he's happy with what he has because he doesn't really have a choice?
Yeah, I think the challenge for Newcastle, although it's a very positive one, is if they can get to the knockout stage of the Champions League and they've got a massive game away at PSG on Wednesday, then from there they're in for a longer season. And remember, the last time Newcastle were in the Champions League, they didn't get out of their group, and PSG were also in it as well. So the advantage of the Champions League and a deep run is money. The disadvantage for Eddie Howe is he needs more depth, and he doesn't have that at the moment. And I think that was obvious coming off the back of an excellent win over PSV. They were a little bit kind of hungover in their performance and not at their best against Aston Villa, and playing so many games at this time, and the new Champions League format also meaning that the last two league phase games go into the new year, mean that for a club like Newcastle and of course others in the Champions League, your festive period is no longer just late December. Your festive period runs all the way to the end of January because of these extra Champions League games, and it's clear that Eddie Howe would like defensive reinforcements. At the other end, I think they'll be relatively content because Nick Woltemada's scoring goals. So is Yohan Wissa after coming back from his injury. Harvey Barnes is in excellent form. Bruno Guimaraes is weighing in with goals. If Anthony Gordon can get on the score sheet a few more times as well, Eddie Howe will be quite happy, I think, with the centre of the park and his attacking options. But key to Newcastle's season is, are they going to have enough defenders fit, and can they keep enough clean sheets? And that will ultimately define whether they can get top 4 or top 5 and how far they can go in the Champions League.
And over at West Ham, they seem to be close to agreeing a deal to sell Lucas Paqueta to Flamengo. Flamengo have offered 35.6 million for the midfielder. So what's the latest on that one?
Yeah, the latest at the time of recording, and it might move quite fast, is that there's an agreement in principle between West Ham and Flamengo, and West Ham have softened their stance. They're prepared to let Paqueta go now, so there won't be a loan back or a pre-agreement for the end of the season. By now, we should point out the Brazilian window closes in March, so it doesn't absolutely have to be done before February the 2nd, but the direction of travel is that Paqueta will be a Flamengo player, and having agreed to the number, which is the part that is verbally in place, they're now working out the payment terms around the deal. And as you say, it'll be about £35 million or 41 million euros, subject to those payment terms. And once they've verbally agreed the time and the instalments in terms of getting that fee to West Ham, Flamengo will then go back and make a final formal offer, which they expect to be accepted. So they've pushed over the course of the last 2 weeks. They've already agreed terms with Lucas Paqueta. And I would say at the time we're recording this, Paqueta to Flamengo is looking really quite likely.
So Bournemouth are another team that are making moves. Ryan has flown to the UK for his medical after signing his 5.5-year deal. Bournemouth have agreed their deal with Lazio for goalkeeper Christos Mondas. He's heading in 24 hours for his medical, but his is a loan. So what are all the gory details of that?
Yeah, so Ryan, the winger, and Christos Mandas will both join, and the formalities are underway at the time we're speaking. Mandas is going to be coming in, and as you allude to, it's a loan to begin with, but there's a conditional obligation to buy for somewhere around the £60 million mark, and it will be triggered based on appearances. And I'm told, in addition to how often he plays, whether Bournemouth achieve European qualification as well. So there's a few outs here, and there's possibility that the conditional obligation won't be triggered. But if it all goes well, you never know, Bournemouth might choose to buy anyway. So it will stay as an option unless it becomes that conditional obligation. But I'm actually told the conditional obligation to trigger it and force Bournemouth to buy is relatively tough to achieve. And as a consequence, the loan fee reflects whether Bournemouth do or don't buy. So it starts at 1.3 million to loan him with this conditional obligation. If the conditional obligation isn't triggered, Bournemouth will send him back to Lazio, but then they'll have to pay another 870,000. So give or take, it's either going to be worth just over $1 million on a loan, but then kind of a penalty fee or more money on that loan, taking it over $2 million, or they'll trigger the obligation to buy and then take the player permanently for £60 million. So Mandos was somebody that Bournemouth were keen on. He's still young, only 24 years of age. He plays for the Greek national team. And obviously Ryan is viewed as that long-term successor to Antoine Semenyo. So two really good bits of business as far as Bournemouth are concerned late in this January window.
So there's a lot of buzz about Ryan at the moment, and he's just signed a 5.5-year deal. What does that mean for Bournemouth?
Yeah, this was all about finding a long-term replacement to Antoine Semenyo, and the winger or attacker, because he's very versatile, is somebody that Bournemouth think has that same kind of power and explosiveness and acceleration over short spaces, and hopefully somebody that will take to the Premier League very quickly. It's a big investment by Bournemouth. They've effectively spent half of their Semenyo fee on Rayan. The total deal will cost about 35 million euros. It's a 5-year contract, as you say, and he has done his medical, so that's all now formal, subject to a work permit. And I think Bournemouth were looking to be aggressive in this market, knowing that several other top clubs in Europe were looking at the player and maybe were going to come in during the summer. So they've got ahead of the market, and a top talent will come to the Premier League. And a very interesting one, you know, in the same way that Chelsea signed Esteval, a lot of people think that Ryan has that potential to be very big very quickly. And this is a really top signing as far as Bournemouth are concerned. And even though over the summer and in this January they lost a lot of senior players, they've been able to move quickly and effectively in the market, and they'll feel set up to have a good second half of the season as a consequence. And it wouldn't at all surprise me if Ryan gets a fair amount of game time between now and May.
Okay, I have a little bit of a rogue one for you. So Manchester City, who have been very active in this transfer window, it seems are actively keeping tabs on Trent Alexander-Arnold. Now, obviously, these are just reports, and other reports are even saying that he's not on the shopping list for January, but it could be potentially in the summer. Like, do you think there's anything there, or is that just absolutely nothing?
At the moment, I'm not aware of any contact between Trent Alexander-Arnold and Manchester City. I know we've seen some reports in Spain that suggest it might be the beginning of the end. That's not something I've necessarily heard at this point. Remember, Real need to assess, are they even going to bring in a new manager over the summer? And if they do, there'll be a whole new name and perspective. So Trent moved to Real Madrid for the long run and is hoping that he can stay there. If that changes in the summer, of course, there may be clubs that are interested. So we'll have to kind of wait and see how that develops. I'm not aware of Man City contact, though, at this point in a formal or even an informal sense. And I suppose most people are trying to get a read within the market. Is this even a name that could potentially have a shorter stay at Real Madrid than we first expected? So a lot of noise coming out of Spain at the moment, but maybe one more for the summer. More broadly, though, and this is maybe why some are linking Manchester City, they are going to be in the market for a new right back in 2026. And as I revealed last year, and a fair few people in the industry think this could develop, Tino Livramento might be another name to watch. And Ross Wilson, who's the sporting director of Newcastle, had two big tasks on day one, and he's highly regarded, so he might pull off both of them. The first was a Sven Botman contract extension. That's done. The second is to try and get Tino Livramento to extend so he stays at Newcastle. At the moment, that Livramento deal isn't in place. It's not behind or anything like that. The talks were just not as evolved as they were with Sven Botman. So obviously Newcastle want Livramento to stay, but if that new deal isn't signed, Manchester City are definitely one of the clubs keeping an eye on that situation. And that, plus these Trent rumours, even though there's not much to them at the moment, show you where they're targeting some of their efforts. They'll bring in a right back in the summer in likelihood, and central midfield is another area where Manchester City are likely to add somebody, because Bernardo Silva is expected to go at the end of the season, and that's where Elliot Anderson links come from. And naturally for Anderson, you'll have Manchester United in the mix, and possibly even Chelsea as well. So we're going to get a lot of movement from City again, regardless of whether Pep Guardiola stays or goes. And much of that now, because they've done the bulk of their business with Gay and Semenyo in January, is expected to happen in the summer rather than too much late movement. Although one name that's worth just sort of thinking about with the outgoing side on Man City is obviously Oscar Bob, and Fulham are not far off completing that deal.
Okay, I think you've helped a lot of Liverpool fans not be very frustrated there. Another team that we've had some rumours about over the weekend was Chelsea. So according to reports, the club have said that it is impossible to sell Josh Akimbong in this transfer window, despite interest from Crystal Palace and Bayern Munich. What do we know about this?
Yeah, I think the Palace links were only about a possible loan because, as you say, Chelsea have got no desire to sell Josh Achimpong. Player over time may have a different perspective if he's not playing, but he started the first 2 games for Liam Rosinia at right back. More interesting is maybe the Bayern link, because I think they're serious about adding a defender and they've been tracking Josh Achimpong for quite some time. So Achimpong may see himself, and I think this will be the crux to whether something develops or not, as actually a centre-back in the long run, even though he plays right-back as well. And if he wants to go somewhere and be a starting centre-back, and Chelsea sign a starting centre-back such as Jeremy Jacquet, then does Josh Achimpong think that his pathway has been stifled? And that might invite a bid from a suitor, particularly Bayern, over the summer, but irrelevant in many ways as to what a suitor wants if Chelsea maintain their current position, which as of now is Achimpong's not for sale, Achimpong's not for loan, Achimpong's going nowhere, and Chelsea may have a slightly different perspective on pathway compared to the player, because they feel that any new centre-back coming in won't stifle the development of Josh Achimpong, because he'll get some time at right-back, some time at centre-back, and he's still young. So this will be a really difficult deal for anybody to do, and there isn't an anticipation that the player's going to go anywhere now. But in the summer, if Achimpong feels by the end of the season he's not got the game time that he's looking for, then maybe some suitors will see some encouragement, even though Chelsea are adamant at this stage that it doesn't matter who comes calling, the player simply isn't for sale.
Right, okay. So Chelsea have also informed Dortmund that they're going to recall their centre-back, Aaron Anselmino, and that they, along with Manchester United, are keeping their eyes on Mohamed Kader Meite. So what is Chelsea's strategy throughout this whole window?
Yeah, I think with Meite, Chelsea and Liverpool are maybe the ones to watch from the Premier League. Anselmino, it's just a case of bringing back a defender, maybe an indication they don't think they can do Jeremy Jacquet now. And as a consequence, we need to wait and see whether those negotiations, should they not have a breakthrough with Rennes, lead some kind of pre-agreement or loan back, because Rennes' perspective with Jeremy Jacquet is that they need a club record sale more than the 64 million euros that saw Jeremy Docker go to Manchester City. And as importantly, they don't want the player to leave mid-season because they feel like that stops them having the best possible chance of qualifying for the Champions League. Chelsea's valuation is lower than 64 million euros and they want Jacquet now. So there's a bit of a stalemate in negotiations, but the middle ground might be for Chelsea to try and pre-agree something there. And obviously, if Jacquet isn't to arrive now, it makes sense to have Anselmino back as an option and to integrate him into the first team squad between now and the end of the season. So it's quite smart in many ways by Chelsea. They also could have brought back Mamadou Sarr as well, but it looks like he's staying at Strasbourg. So they've now got plenty of defenders. And that also helps, by the way, with a negotiation tactic as well, because if you add another defender now, if they are trying to push to still get Jacquet between now and the end of the window, as opposed to a pre-agreement or a loan back, then they're in a stronger negotiating position, because on paper, at least, it looks like they have less urgency to find a centre-back now because Anselmino has returned from Dortmund. Dortmund was surprised by the move, by the way. They were taken aback. They're not particularly happy that it's happened with only just over a week to go of the transfer window, but the recall clause is there, so Chelsea are well within their rights to do it.
You've been watching The Window on talkSPORT, brought to you by Intuit Quickbooks. Save time and unlock growth with integrated business tools and AI automation, all in one place.